The phrase, "God is an empty concept," can lead us to deeply question the traditional definitions of God found in various religions and spiritual traditions. It suggests that the classical conception of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God may not be a neutral and definitive description of divine reality, but rather a historical construction that may prove insufficient to express the complexity of the human experience of the sacred. To better understand this discussion, it is important to consider the contribution of Michel Foucault. Foucault was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century and devoted his work to investigating the relationships between power, knowledge, and truth. Instead of simply asking whether something is true or false, he sought to understand how certain truths are formed, who legitimizes them, and which power relations are involved in their consolidation. According to Foucault, knowledge is not entirely neutral or independent. It is produced within specific historical contexts and shaped by relations of power. This means that our ideas about normality, morality, identity, and also about God are molded by dominant discourses in each era. Thus, when one states that God is an empty concept, it can be interpreted in light of Foucault's thought that the notion of God is not a fixed and universal essence, but a concept constructed and sustained by particular discursive practices, institutions, and traditions. This perspective is not identical to the critique made by Friedrich Nietzsche, who proclaimed the famous idea that God is dead, indicating that modernity had undermined the foundations of traditional religious beliefs. Nor is it the same as the position of Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued that in the absence of God, human beings are radically free and responsible for creating their own values. While Nietzsche and Sartre emphasize the existential consequences of the loss of absolute religious foundations, Foucault focuses on analyzing how these foundations were historically produced and how they function within networks of power.
From a spiritual point of view, the expression empty concept can be understood in different ways. For some, it represents a critique of rigid and dogmatic definitions of God. In this sense, empty would not mean a denial of divinity, but openness, an invitation to move beyond fixed images and to seek a more personal and less institutionalized experience of the sacred. For others, the phrase may trigger a crisis of faith, as it questions foundations considered unshakable. However, this crisis can also be seen as an opportunity for growth. Instead of accepting beliefs automatically, the individual is invited to reflect critically on them, understanding their historical and cultural context. Throughout history, conceptions of God have changed significantly. Ancient civilizations developed their own mythologies, while the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, consolidated the idea of a single transcendent God. These transformations reveal that the understanding of divinity evolves alongside cultural, political, and social changes. In a pluralistic society, the assertion that God is an empty concept also raises the question of coexistence among different beliefs. If we understand that every conception of God is embedded in a historical and discursive context, it becomes easier to recognize the legitimacy of religious and philosophical diversity. The challenge, then, is not to impose a single definition, but to promote dialogue, respect, and peaceful coexistence. In summary, by relating this phrase to the thought of Michel Foucault, we realize that the focus is not simply on denying or affirming the existence of God, but on problematizing how we speak about God, which discourses sustain that speech, and what effects of power it produces. It is an invitation to critical reflection, to understand that our truths, including religious ones, are shaped by history, and that questioning them can enrich rather than diminish our human experience. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next video.